Good morning. Welcome to another session of our Hexagon Hacks. I believe this is the last one for our maintenance mastery theme. In our Hexagon Hack series like this one, we do this every Wednesday, and it's about 15 minutes where we just go over a quick topic within EAM following our theme, right? So this month, of course, will be our maintenance mastery. So this is the last session for that, and then of course system admin hack starts next week, and then we had to change the schedule up a little bit because of all the holidays, but October 29th will be the first for that. So closing it out for maintenance mastery, we're going to be talking a little bit about the closing codes. So understanding closing codes in EAM, and getting a better idea of how they work, right? So closing codes, of course, we have 4 of those. So we have to understand the 4-part framework of how those work, our problem, failure, cause, and action codes. We'll also take a look at the hierarchies and how they kind of work together, and then a little bit of a review of equipment classification, how that can further expand categorization. Okay, so our 4-part framework for our closing codes: problem, failure, cause, and action, right? So they tell a story from start to finish, right? So we start with our problem and we work our way to the action, which is understanding the problem all the way to documenting what the fix was, right? So they work sequentially. They tell that story from left to right in this case, all the way from root cause to that final resolution. The beauty of it is it creates a structure, right? So that we have standardization in our documentation for applying these codes in real world applications, and then we can come back and utilize those in RCA metrics, analysis metrics, things like that. So starting with the problem code addresses what is wrong. So it captures that initial observation, what the technician or the operator has noticed when the failure happens, right? So a list of those common examples on the right-hand side, just some problem codes. It's not stark, a normal power leaking. And in this case, we'll kind of go through a real-world application just as an example, right? So let's say we have a maintenance technician. He's rolling down the plant and he sees that the pump drive motor is making a loud grinding noise, right? So within his work order, he puts in a problem code of P020 for abnormal noise. Yeah. So the failure code would be the next choice in our framework. And this moves beyond the symptoms to identify the specific mechanism or reason for that failure, right? So some additional examples: loose connections, lube failures, electrical mechanical failures. You can get more specific than that if you'd like, right? So this helps us understand exactly what happened in our failure here. So in our scenario, after further investigation, our tech has noticed that the brushes are worn out and will most likely be replaced. So component wear and fatigue is our failure here, right? So moving on to the next code, our cause. All right, so this is diving a little bit deeper into the failure, maybe even post repair, right? So we're looking at the cause, the actual root cause of the failure. Looking at some of our examples here, our operator errors, inadequate PMs. In this case, we found that the guide bearing had failed. So we simply are using the bearing failure here. So the cause, again, is that foundational element. So it's used in tandem with RCA and root cause analysis features in EAM. So the cause code is one of those underlying values or data elements where that will be picked up and used. Now our action code. So how is it fixed? So we want to capture specific corrective actions taken to restore the equipment to service, right? So we replaced the bearing, or our technician replaced the bearing in this case. So we did a minor repair, mechanical action code, right? So that helps us create that searchable history of what works against equipment. And that allows us to create essentially a backlog of tribal knowledge along with, trending metrics that we can come back and look at to see what's failing, what's trending on failures, and things along those lines, right? All of these codes can be used to help in those scenarios. So taking it a step further past the 4 codes themselves is we can actually create closing code hierarchies in EAM. So that allows us to create a parent-child relationship, right? So the parent closing code is our broad category, our starting point, like the problem, then failure, cause, and action, right? And the child closing code is going to be the next logical value that it would follow from the parent, right? And then there is an equipment filter, so you can specifically filter certain codes for certain pieces of equipment. Just giving an example of how that would work in EAM, just with my beautiful slide I've created. Let's say we have a technician in EAM who is getting ready to apply his closing codes, and he has a hierarchy set up, right? So the motor in the conveyor system is down and won't turn back on. So as he's looking at this, he notices there's no power, so he picks that from the problem code list. And because there's a hierarchy in place, it automatically will reduce the amount of selections based on that parent code. So the child codes would be, in our example here, electrical failure or low voltage. Those are our only 2 options. So we choose electrical failure. It's not turning back on. And then from that electrical failure, we have 3 causes that we can choose from. And we've chosen loose terminals because we've seen that we just need to tighten some things and we should be good, right? So the action to repair that is, of course, minor repair electrical. Right, so the closing code hierarchy helps kind of drive the selections so that they're more accurate, they make more sense. But we can also create those bumper lanes or those guidelines, right? So that we can make sure the data that we're implementing for these closing codes are accurate to the scenarios and situations. And the last piece to it is our class-based actions, right? So we can also apply classifications specific to closing codes. It's pretty straightforward. If we want to use certain codes for, HVAC classed items, motors, pumps, electrical drives, you name it, right? You can create those associations on the closing codes themselves. Just a little bit of additional notes to that before we take a look at these in EAM. Closing codes, they help us reduce that downtime. It allows us to troubleshoot faster, and it gives us that searchable history, right? It can lower repair costs, of course, by preventing recurring failures. We get that RCA data started, and this will lead you into that as you expand into those verticals, so to speak, for RCA reliability metrics, OEE, things like that. Can optimize our PM schedules. This data-driven adjustments can be made due to the actual input from our technicians on the floor, right? So we can adjust our PMs based on the data that's returning. Reliability metrics, like I said, we can start expanding on those by utilizing these 4 codes. These are a part of that foundational data element that we need for that to work, right? And then, of course, continuous improvement. So as things are moving, we can utilize these to support FMEA, RCM programs, along with capital planning and even vendor tracking to an extent. Right, so there's a lot of capabilities with our closing codes, and they're pretty simple. So in EAM, and I hope you guys can still see the screen. Yep, okay, cool. In EAM, our closing codes are typically under our equipment setup menu, right? And then we have our closing codes and then our closing code hierarchy. So the screen for closing codes are pretty straightforward, right? We put in the code and description, and then we determine one of the four that we're creating. In this case, we have problem code for overheating, right? Our classes, again, as I said, comes in right here with our equipment details. So if it's valid for all classes, then it's valid across the system. If we uncheck this, then we're going to have to populate the classes tab with classes that we can utilize it for. Additionally, we have groups. This is new. So we can also add specific groupings, right? So again, problem, failure, cause, action, they're all created in the same screen just based on the type, and then we determine how we're going to utilize those. Okay. And then the last thing, again, our hierarchy. So this screen right underneath our closing codes is where we can build that structure. There are ways to look at this so it's not so convoluted, obviously, but we input our parent code by choosing what we want to build. So we start at the problem, and then the child would be a failure. So you see what I can do here, right? And then I can additionally filter by equipment. So I would continue building this by going problem, failure, then failure cause, and then cause and action, right? And then I have a full structure from problem to action. So we have a little structure as an example in EAM, and I'm going to kind of use that to show you guys what that looks like. So on this work order here, I've just slid over to it real quick, and on my closing tab, I can input my four closing codes right here. So I'll start with the problem. And if I pick this overheating problem code, it has a structure. Therefore, the failures will be limited to the 3 children that it has. So if I were to choose overheating as my problem, lubrication was the failure, my cause should be limited to improper lubricant, and the action should be replace, right? So those hierarchies streamline the choices and make it easier on the technician, but it also makes the accurate or the the data that we're getting on the back end of this more accurate, because we can create those lists of the codes that work and ignore the codes that don't, right? Okay, so slide back over here, and it kind of worked out perfect on timing. So on our last slide, again, I just want to say thank you guys for joining me to go over some closing codes and closing code hierarchy. Just to kind of recap, right? So we have our 4 codes, right? The problem is the what, the failure is the why, cause is the root, and the action is the fix. So remembering that, moving forward, you can do a whole lot with those codes in EAM, and you'd be surprised what you can pull back through reporting, KPIs, metrics, anything like that. And especially if you guys are starting down that the RCM FMEA route, reliability metrics route. So this is your first step in that on that road, right? And yeah, so I appreciate you guys joining me. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks, guys.